All right, Genesis chapter 47. Joseph and his brothers had been reunited together. Of course, at this point, the brothers and the father have traveled down to the land of Egypt. They have been granted the area of Goshen to go down, and they're also going to be the keepers of Pharaoh's flocks and all of that. Now, we get to Genesis 47, verse 13 and following, and we read about the impact of the famine upon the nation of Egypt and the people, and then how Joseph handles those things. So let's read. I hate to break this up. Let's just read 13 to 26. Let's break it up, just two people. 13, let's say, to 19, then 20 to 26. Who will get 13 to 19? Ron, and then Elijah, the rest of it there.
Now there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. So when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, for why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed." Then Joseph said, "Give your livestock, and I will give you bread for your livestock if the money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them the bread in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the cattle of the herds, and the donkeys. Thus they fed them with bread in exchange for all their livestock that year. When the year had ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, "We will not hide from my lord that our money is gone. My lord also has our herds of livestock. Therefore, is nothing left in the sight of my lord but our bodies and our lands? Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants of Pharaoh. Give us seed, that we may live and not die, that the land may not be desolate."
Then Joseph bought all the land of Egypt from Pharaoh, for every man of the Egyptians sold his field because the famine was severe upon them. So the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he moved them into the cities, from one end of the borders of Egypt to the other end. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had rations allotted to them by Pharaoh, and they ate their rations which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their lands. Then Joseph said to the people, "Indeed, I have bought you and your land this day from Pharaoh. Look, here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And it shall come to pass in the harvest that you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh. 4/5 shall be your own, as seed for the field and for your food, for those of your households, and as food for your little ones." So they said, "You have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants." And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt to this day, that Pharaoh should have 1/5, except for the land of the priests only, which did not become Pharaoh's.
Okay, so question number 2, I'd ask multiple parts really. What happened to Egypt's economy during the famine? What impact did it have on the citizens? How did Joseph deal with it, and how did the people feel about it? So, first of all, what happens with the Egyptian economy?
Oh, with the economy? Well, it has to change from one method of economy to another.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it starts out with money.
Okay.
It moves from money to livestock.
Mm-hmm.
It moves from livestock to land. And then it actually kind of moves into, they're not slaves, but they harvest for Pharaoh. They get to keep most of it, but 1/5 of it goes to Pharaoh. So the economy just keeps evolving from a cash system to a barter system to an almost like indentured servant. It's not really indentured necessarily, but they did not have their own land.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
Money was worthless.
Yeah, it talks about the money failed. So the economy that was in existence collapsed. That's how bad the famine became. I'm not sure there's a time in the history of this country where we've come close to something like this. We've gone through hard times. There's been recessions. There's been depressions. There was the Great Depression. Maybe it's the closest we've come to something like this, but didn't reach this extent. So the economy failed essentially what they had in place. And then as Nancy was outlining there, what is it that the people begin to do about it? How do they respond to it? Something you want to notice in here is Joseph is not the one going to the people demanding these conditions. All right, these are the people saying, we have a problem. Here's what we want to do to fix it. Mike, do you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that as they came, you take that first person that kind of made this idea or said, hey, I can bring the livestock. After that, the flow of people start to come in. Okay, yeah, let's do this. But if it's this severe here in Egypt, and they have enough grain to be able to feed people, imagine how bad it is at the other parts of the world where this is going on.
Right, exactly right. Unbelievable conditions for many of us to even fully comprehend. Paul?
I was thinking if they kept their livestock, they would end up perishing anyway because they'd rather eat than feed their livestock.
Well, they didn't even have anything to feed their livestock. They ran out of food for themselves, food for their animals. And so they say, hey, so let me ask you this. When they made the deal for their livestock, did Pharaoh have all his people corral all the animals up and put them in pens in Pharaoh's ranch? What's actually going on here?
Basically working for Pharaoh from now on.
Okay, you start with the livestock and stuff. They still have charge of it, but Pharaoh's the owner. The land, they're not kicked off the land when Pharaoh takes the land in his ownership. They are working the land. So indentured servant or sharecropper maybe is another idea. That here they are, they're working this land on behalf of Pharaoh. They keep certain proceeds of it, the bulk of it, 80%, as he talked there, 20% goes to Pharaoh as kind of almost like a flat tax kind of situation. But they do this. It's the people that are driving it. It's not an oppressive government. Joseph's not an oppressive guy who comes in and says, I'm going to take this because, I want something from you. They're saying, look, we realize you have something and we want to exchange. So this is still an exchange taking place. This isn't what we would think of modern concept communism. The state seizes all property and then they say it's all ours and you get a fifth and we get 4/5. It's not that kind of condition.
Well, what you have here is you have a barter system. So you're instead of trading money for goods and services, you're trading goods and services for goods and services. And that's a concept that we can abide by today when the money runs out. So this is a pattern that we can follow. And as you said, this is not communism because that induces people to do as little as possible. This induces people to work as hard as possible. No one's sitting on their rear end watching the Nile flow by. They're out working, they're planting seed, they're providing, and then they're taxed heavily on what they produce, but they're forced to continue to work, which it sounds like they were happy to do.
Right. Yes, and they are very happy to be able to do this. It's death, or here's what we'll do. And the people, as John said, they're the drivers behind this. They're working. They're coming up with solutions. They're saying, here's what we'll do. Our herds will be his. We'll be his. We'll work for him. We'll work on his behalf. Our land will be his. But it was the conditions that necessitated the move to this change here. So things have worked out where the people and then a nation survives the famine. Otherwise, everything would have completely... One of the very worst things that could ever happen in any society is for there to be a depopulation. And if the famine continued, they didn't have this resource that Joseph had set up, people would die or they would leave trying to find food for their families. And whenever that happens, you have very serious problems. You know, there's people in this world who think, well, overpopulation is a problem. Overpopulation has never been a problem. We have more than enough land, more than enough resources if people will work to harvest those resources. But when you start to go down on the population, you start to lose that harvesting of the resources and the labor that's put into those things. The economy will completely fall apart. So it was saved here because of Joseph's foresight and the people realizing and understanding, here's what we need to do to get through this. Any other thoughts there? All right, let's jump in. Yes, Ron.
Well, just in a very general way, what we see here is, as you were describing, these people sold themselves into servitude. And contrary to today, where we want to say anybody that would be in that condition, it's evil, it's wrong, it's corrupt. Well, this nation survived, and those people survived of it. So it's telling us, even in the New Testament, we know where that existed, and they weren't told to abolish it because
Right.
it was a means of survival. So again, we can be jaded in our thinking by how we currently view things as a society.
Yes. And to put a fine point on it, slavery in the Bible in and of itself is not a sinful form of economics, because that's what it boils down to. Now, men stealing, kidnapping is sinful. Abuse, physical, mental, verbal abuse is sinful. We understand that. But the history of slavery, of servitude, throughout the Bible, generally it was just an economic arrangement. Somebody needed work, and they said, okay, you belong to me. You do the work I'll tell you to do. I'll provide you food, clothing, shelter. And there are a lot of other things in there. It's not like what we think of the United States, the history that we typically consider about that relationship, the slavery here. So, yes, this was a case where, hey, here's the way we're going to get through this. Let's do it. All right, verses 27 to 31. 27 to 31. Who will read that for us? Go ahead, Hank.
So Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they possessed their and grew their multiplied exceedingly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. When the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son. Joseph said to him, "Now, if I have found favor in your sight, please put your hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. You shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place." And he said, I will do this as you have said. And he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. So Israel bowed himself on the head. So Israel bowed himself on the head of the bed.
All right. So question number 3, I asked, what happened with the Israelites while they dwelt in Goshen? This is post-famine. What happened with them?
Grew and multiplied exceedingly.
Right. What's another way to put that?
Became a great nation.
They prospered.
They prospered. They became a great nation down there. And by the time we get to the book of Exodus, we see how they continue to grow and populate. One of the things is the way they're able to grow and multiply is because they are down in the richest part of the land. They have plenty of resources for them, for their flocks and everything, that they're able to prosper down in there. And so God blessed them in this situation. Any other thoughts there? All right, question number 4. How long did Jacob live in Egypt, and why did he want to be buried in Canaan?
17 years.
17 years. Does that stand out to anybody?
That's how old Joseph was when he entered Egypt.
Okay. So his father had him the first 17 years of his life, and his father was with him another 17 years at the end of his father's life. I find that very interesting. So he's down there. He lives to 147 years old. Why did he want to be buried in Canaan? Promised land. What else does maybe he say about that?
He wanted to be buried with his father.
Okay. He wanted to be buried up there to lie with his fathers. And he's going to be buried in the cave of Machpelah up there, where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and then, of course, Leah is there. But we don't learn about that till later. But yeah, what is that indicating about Jacob? When he brings Joseph in and says, you have to swear to me that you're going to take my body up there.
He's showing his trust in God. Earlier in the story, he told Pharaoh that his days had been vexed with evil and tribulations throughout his life. Well, what that caused him to do was to rely on God, and he knew what God's promise was, and that was that land back in that area was the promised land. And, you know, Paul says in Acts that our journey to the kingdom is going to be filled with tribulation, just like Jacob's was. Well, that tribulation caused Jacob to rely on God, to realize God's promises were true, that this whole situation was God taking care of his people and fulfilling his promise, and he wanted to show his reliance in God and do this thing.
Okay. We kind of have a similar thing today, where there are people who, even though they've moved all around the country, that back at the old home place, they have their burial plots. And they want to go back and be with them there. But this goes beyond just sort of that sentimental thing, as John was pointing out, that his descendants, they're all now down in this land of Goshen. They're prospering greatly, as it just pointed out. But he says, I want to go back to Canaan. When I die, take my body back up there. It's because of that belief in God's promise that the people would return there one day.
I think also when you look at his lifespan, this is a very short period of life that he lives in. He wants to go back to where his land is. He owns that land where he's talking about. When you have these generations that kind of grow up in Egypt, you can see how easily, whenever Moses starts leading them out, how easily they want to go back to Egypt where they come from. This is where those come from.
Right. Very good. All right. So we're not going to read 48, but question number 5. What did Jacob do relative to Ephraim and Manasseh, and what did this impact?
Jacob took them as his own sons,
Okay.
which made them, in inheritance, it made them equal with Joseph's brothers.
Okay.
They would receive as though they were actually Jacob's sons.
Very good. What's the other word we use for that?
Adoption.
Yeah, adoption. He adopted his grandsons as his own sons. And that happens from time to time in our culture, where a grandparent for whatever reason, adopts their grandchild and they legally become their son or their daughter. If you take a quick peek over in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, let's read verses 1 and 2 here. 1 Chronicles 5, 1 and 2. Who will read that for us? It's go ahead, Elijah.
Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, he was indeed the firstborn, but because he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, so that the genealogy is not listed according to the birthright. Yet Judah prevailed over his brothers, and from him came a ruler, although the birthright was Joseph's.
Okay, so that, of course, bleeds over into what we're going to look at in just a minute, but I wanted to grab this idea that Joseph, because of the adoption of his two sons, became the one who had the birthright. Because remember, the firstborn son was to get a double portion. So the way that would work in this case, Jacob having 12 sons, whatever his estate was, would be divided up into 13 portions, and the oldest would get 2 of those. So that would make it 11. The other 11 would be divided up. So if a man had 3 sons, it would be divided into 4 portions. The oldest one would get 2 of those, and then the youngest would get the other 2. So in that case, it'd be half and then a quarter each for the younger one. So that's how the birthright worked out. And that's why you have Ephraim and Manasseh, that because of that, Joseph has the birthright. And then when you get to the land of Egypt, when they go in and they settle it, that's why you have a territory of Ephraim, you have a territory of Manasseh, but you don't have a territory of Joseph because of what happens right here. And they have that birthright. They each get a portion, just like the other tribes, except Levi, of course, gets a portion. We'll talk about Levi and Simeon in just a minute. Any other thoughts along those lines? All right, let's jump then. Chapter 49. Chapter 49 says there, verse 1, he called his sons, gathered together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. And he's just simply referring to this future of theirs that would be fulfilled. Mainly it's going to be fulfilled in the tribes of Israel, but there are other things that are looking forward and looking beyond that to a much later time. But all these that he's describing here is connected to his belief, his commitment, his conviction about God, his promises, and what he has told him about his descendants, that they would become a great nation, they would bless the earth, they would have a land one day. So let's read here verses 3 and 4 about Reuben. So Genesis 49, 3 and 4. Who will grab that? Elijah.
Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might in the beginning of my strength, the excellence of dignity and the excellence of power. Unstable as water, you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed. Then you defiled it. He went up to my couch.
Okay, so Reuben, firstborn, summary here. What does he tell him? What does he acknowledge?
Basically, he forfeited his birthright because of the sin that he committed with one of his wives.
Okay, how does he describe him in this there in verse 4?
Unstable as water.
Unstable as water. What is that saying about Reuben?
Always changing, never able to stay solid on one thing.
Jacob had no confidence in Reuben whatsoever. He couldn't rely on him. He was just unresponsible.
Yeah, this, Mike.
I think the water also, it takes the shape of whatever it is, and it takes the path of least resistance. So I think that's, some of those characteristics of Watertown, he described them also to the point that he's just not stable.
Yeah, it's with Elijah. Do you have something?
I was just going to say he's contrasting that in verse 3 with the excellency of dignity, excellency of power, almost as if to say, you had promise because you were my firstborn. But this is how it turned out.
Yeah, a man's firstborn son, it's his first child, as we have recorded. You know, there's a hope with the firstborn, but he did not live up to that whatsoever. And this isn't what's cited here wasn't a one-time thing with Reuben, that, you know, Reuben was a solid guy, good character, and then he just did something really out of character. No, he's saying this is your character. There's a flaw in here with you, Reuben. You're unstable. You can't be a leader of the people. Even though you're the firstborn, you cannot be the leader. And it's obvious you are not a leader of my people. So you're not going to receive the firstborn rights. Well, let's read verses 5 to 7 and we'll answer question 1. 5 to 7. Who's got that? Philip?
Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel.
Okay, so question 1 I had asked, why do you suppose Jacob addressed Simeon and Levi together, and what did he say about their future? Because these are the two that are Elijah.
He probably addressed them together because they were the ones that slaughtered the city.
Okay, because they worked in conjunction with each other on this. John?
They also had the same mother and the same father, so they were full brothers, not half brothers like the rest.
Right.
Well, I was just going to say, he addressed them together because they schemed together always. Everything they did that's revealed at Shechem, on the scheming and the planning, it was the two of them together.
Right.
No guilt in that matter.
Yes, and part of what it indicates is these two brothers. So you got 4 boys who are the sons of Leah, right? You have Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. They're those 4 firstborn sons. That's when, remember, Rachel was all upset about it. She gave her handmaid, all those things unfolded. But these two here are close. You know, and that happens in families, that they get close together, and these two are close together with each other. And they have worked together, which comes out very plainly in the incident at Shechem.
Yeah, I think whenever the nation of Israel, after they got on the other side of the Red Sea, I think it was Levi that went through and killed the people who had worshipped them.
Okay, he says in this thing here, they're instruments of cruelty. They slay a man in anger. So these guys have anger, they have wrath, they have a character that's certainly open, if not prone to violence. They have no issue with that in certain situations. And so, yes, then when Moses comes down from the mountain in Exodus 32 and finds them worshiping the calf, he says, who's on my side? Well, the sons of Levi come to him, and he says, go through and kill all of them that are still involved in this. And they slew about 3,000 of the people of Israel. But what does he say about them? What's going to happen with them in the future?
Be divided.
Okay, let not my honor be united to their assembly. You know, don't let that happen. They're not to be together. So I will divide them in Jacob. How did that end up playing out? Nancy?
Simeon received a very small portion in the southwest corner of Judah's territory.
Mm-hmm.
And Levi his tribe was assigned cities, but they really didn't have their own land. They were provided for, but they were assigned, I think it was 48 cities.
Mm-hmm.
And so they really didn't have their own land. But they were not, Levi and Simeon were not living near each other, completely separated.
Right, even those descendants.
Well, he prophesies that they're going to be scattered. So as Nancy said, the Levites were scattered. They had no land. They had no promise. They had a few cities that were scattered, literally, across the country. Simeon was actually completely absorbed into Judah and ended up spreading out through the tribe of Judah. So they too were scattered. So this prophecy comes true exactly as it was stated.
Right, exactly right. Exactly right. So that all unfolded just as he prophesied there. Let's read verses 8 through 12 about Judah. Who'll read 8 through 12? Clint.
Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness who dares rouse him. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Binding his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he has washed his garments in wine, and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk.
All right, so question 2, I asked you to note what is said about Judah, be prepared to discuss Shiloh here. So what's he talking about with Judah?
Well, specific to verse 10, he's talking about a tribal staff and a law ruling staff. So it's a messianic prophecy. And Shiloh in Jewish literature is often referred to as a Messiah. And so what he's stating is that, if I understand this correct, that the tribe of Judah will remain intact until the coming of the Messiah, and their ability to be law-giving and ruling continued until Christ came, of which that was relinquished to the Romans, and they lost their authority, if you will, to minister capital punishment. So he's talking about the things that will be fulfilled at the time of Christ.
Right, right. And this concept of the scepter in Judah, let's explore that just a minute. What about this idea of the scepter being in Judah? Where does that begin? How long does that last?
But, it begins with David, I guess, whenever we're talking about the kings. He has the scepter, and no one ever out of Judah, no one ever came outside of that tribe for that kingship.
Okay, yeah, and that southern kingdom there continued that Davidic line, which was of the tribe of Judah. Was there anything else there?
Well, that scepter is power. Judah's not going to lose the power until Shiloh comes. And Shiloh's peace, which Ron stated was Jewish for the Messiah. So Judah is going to wield that power when Christ comes. He's going to assume that role. And later on, all nations, all people are going to give account to Judah. Once again, it's prophesied Christ in that same prophecy that at some point all people are going to give account to Judah, Christ.
Right.
So to that point that you're asking then, Stephen, would you say that this was all fulfilled with the establishment of the church and the ending of the nation of Israel?
Yeah, he's pointing forward to that for sure here. And it's sort of like in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, where he talks about the seed of the woman will bruise the head of the serpent will bruise his heel. That, if you just read that and you don't know anything else about the Bible, that's very vague in there. And this is somewhat vague right here, but when you go to the New Testament, you see how things unfold, then you realize, oh, he was talking about those specific things, though you don't pick up on it without that future knowledge. Mike?
Yeah, usually the cross-reference from Genesis 49:9 is Revelation 5:5, where it says, and one of the elders said to me, weep no more, behold, the lion, the tribe of Judah, the root of David, and David has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and set the seals. So he's talking about Christ being the lion out of Judah.
Yes, this is where that concept is first introduced. It's opened up. What about that idea of the lion? When we think of lion, what do we think of?
Power,
Do-
authority.
Power, authority, king of the jungle, the one that, out there in creation, nobody wants to mess with. There's no natural enemy of a lion, right? I mean, nobody preys on the humans, of course, do. But talking about out there among the animals, he's the boss, right? And Judah is the strong one among all those brothers. He's the one that's the leader. They're going to follow him in what he's doing. When the Jews return from exile, or I should say when the Israelites return from exile, that's when they become known as Jews. And that comes from Judah. And they are Jews. And so that tells you how dominant Judah really was, the southern kingdom being named Judah, but then even later understanding the relationship between those people, the Israelites, and Judah being named Jews. Any other thoughts there? All right, so you have several other brothers who are mentioned here. We're skipping right over them. Verse 22 down to 26. Let's read that. It's about Joseph. Genesis 49, 22 to 26. Who's got that? John.
Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archer bitterly attacked him, shot at him, harassed him severely. Yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings of the breasts of the womb. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond blessings of my parents, up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph and the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers.
Okay, so just in looking at this entire chapter, who's the focus of the chapter? When you think of volume of content, it means Zebulun's got one verse, Issachar's 2, Dan's kind of got 3, Gad, verse 19, Asher 20, Naphtali 21, very short. Deer let loose, uses beautiful words. That's all this said of Naphtali. Benjamin even, one verse, ravenous wolf in the morning shall devour the prey, night shall divide the spoil. When you look at this chapter, Judah and Joseph are the focus. That goes all the way back to chapter 37 that starts this dual look. And I know generally we think of, it's mostly on Joseph. And I understand, and that tends to be where my mind goes. But Judah and Joseph are the two that are contrasted here. And they're really highlighted in their role in this family and how the family's saved and delivered and who's a leader in the family, all those kinds of things. But here with Joseph, he's pointing forward to the time in the future, the fruitfulness that he's going to have. Of course, through Ephraim and Manasseh, they were two of the largest tribes, Ephraim especially in the northern kingdom. Israel and Ephraim are used interchangeable for that northern nation at times. So that's how dominant and powerful they were there. Anything else before we press on? All right. So, summary version. Jacob calls his sons in and charges them to take him and bury him in that cave of Machpelah up there. Genesis 49:33. Somebody read that for us. 49:33. Who's got that? Go ahead, Hank.
And when Jacob had finished commanding his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed and the breath and breathed his last, feet up to the bed and breath his last, and was gathered to his feet.
In verse 1, go ahead.
And Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him.
Okay, so Jacob's death, how does it describe it? And then what does Joseph do?
He-
He just kind of curls up and dies in his sleep, it
Yeah.
sounds like.
Okay, this is a peaceful death that he has. And then it says, gathered to his people. Again, that's the idea. This isn't fast forwarding to his burial. That's another issue. It's talking about when he died, his soul departed his body, and it was brought in with Abraham, with Isaac, with Rebekah. That's the people he was gathered to. And then Joseph here. Why does it bring out for us that Joseph being there?
Joseph loved his father.
He loved his father. When Jacob was headed down there and God revealed to him, look, you're going to see him and he's going to lay his hands on your eyes. And this is it right here where he's with his father at his death. It says he fell on his father's face and wept over him. That's when he would have closed his father's eyes in death. And he kissed him.
Like him sitting on the edge of the bed.
Right.
He gets ready and just picks his feet up and lay on the bed and lays back, and like Mike said, he goes peaceful death. And
Breathe his last.
then his son kisses his dad goodbye, says his goodbye.
Yep. Yep. So when you get on down further, what do? What does Joseph do with his father's body? How long does this take? What unfolds here?
Joseph has his father embalmed, and it takes 40 days.
Right, 40 days to embalm him. They mourn him 70, which would have included that 40 days. And then what's Joseph's request to Pharaoh and what ends up happening there? What do they do?
He goes up to Pharaoh and he asks, hey, if I've done well for you, allow me to go bury my father. Where's that?
Yeah, and he sends an intermediary to go and deliver that message. And Pharaoh gives him permission, but he not only gives him permission, but what ends up happening?
Sends all the elders of his house and all the elders of the land of Egypt, and the servants, they go up to the land.
There's a huge funeral procession that goes up there. What this is indicating is Pharaoh, his love for Joseph and appreciation for what Joseph had done for the country to save that nation through the famine. It's how much respect he had for Joseph and appreciation for his father, recognizing his father has something to do with Joseph's life and who he is and what he is and everything like that. But it's essentially he gives him state burial rights in a sense that he's all these officials to indicate, this is a great man, and they take him up there, and it would include a military escort. When it talks about horsemen, he's sending military people to protect them on their way up and their way back. Of course, he wants to protect Joseph, right? For sure. If nobody else, he wants Joseph to get up there and get back securely. Ron, do you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to comment what you did in verse 9. He talks about chariots and he talks about horsemen. He refers to it as a great gathering. So, to your point, it truly was. This is the most powerful nation on the earth at that time.
Yeah, you're talking about hundreds of people going up there on this because you have all the sons. There's probably grandsons, maybe some of the wives that are involved. It talks about the little children being left. So there's some people who stay out of Jacob's family back there. But then you have all these other officials and representatives of the nation that go up, plus the military escort. So you've got a lot of people headed up there. But the brothers then, let's just read this briefly down in verse 15. So Genesis 50, verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him. So they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, before your father died, he commanded, saying, thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face, and they said, Behold, we are your servants. Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant it for evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now, therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. All right, so thinking about that, the brothers are nervous after the death of their father, and they send this message to him. We don't have the record of where Jacob revealed this, but I'm going to take it at face value that Jacob did tell his sons this. They, somewhere along the way, had a discussion. Where was Joseph all those years? How did he get down there? All of that. But when Joseph gets the message, what's his response to it? Caesar?
He actually told them that don't be afraid. I will provide.
Yes.
And take care of you.
And before that, what did he do? As soon as he heard it,
He wept.
he wept. Why would he weep? Carrie?
Well, just that he realized his brothers were still hanging on to that guilt, and still not seeing that everything that happened was God's plan.
Yeah, it struck him.
I was thinking, Steve, when I read this and was reflecting on it, they look at him, and I would think Joseph's thinking, I'm not disingenuous about all of this. I have, I've told you from the beginning, that I don't hold you accountable for this because it was the will of God, but they revert right back.
Yeah. Now, remember, this is 17 years later. Because when the father showed up, he said, I'm 130 and now 147. They've just buried their father. And these guys, all these years later, are worried about that. Anita.
I guess John like summed it up, that God, not man, is ultimately in control, and that even those things that men do for evil reasons can be used to achieve his godliness.
Yes, exactly right. John.
And I think that's what that sorrow shows, that Joseph truly forgave his brothers. And he was able to do that because he had trust in God. He knew that God is going to take care of things in the end. But Joseph is able to forgive, and he's heartfelt about it because he has total trust in God. And I think that Anita's right. That's exactly what it shows there is his total trust in God.
Yeah, and specifically in verse 20, he states, God meant it for good in order to bring it about as it is this day.
Right.
And save the people. I mean, he was a salvation to the people.
Exactly right. And so you can see the beauty of Joseph's character here, the beauty of God's working in his life and their lives. And they needed to come to grips with everything is okay. I find it beautiful when he says to them, verse 21, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. I'm here for you. I'm looking out for you. And that was no small promise because his brothers, the 10 of them were older than him. They're probably going to pass away before him. And he's saying, I'm going to look out after your families. Yeah. They're going to be provided for and taken care of. And that's a sweet blessing to a man to think, so when I'm gone and I can't do anything, he's going to be looking out for
So
him.
he's modeling his behavior after God.
Yes.
God had provided for his people. Well, Joseph knew God is all. He's trying to be righteous and act like a follower of God as we should.
Yes, exactly right. All right. Well, like I said, Lord willing, we'll start a new study in a few weeks in Harmony of the Gospels. Thank you all.